Draw the curtains to a friendly dusk, and let the room settle the way the sea settles after a long, even tide. One steady breath in, and one slow breath out. Tonight, we'll drift along Gielenor's quieter roads, past Varroc's lamplit stones and across the dark, glassy waters around Lunar Isle, where star lamps hum above the astral altar and old magic asks to be handled kindly. Nothing here is in a hurry. The kettle knows its song, the river keeps its silver, and somewhere a careful scholar turns in his sleep, carrying a knot that wants smoothing rather than breaking. Keep your mind's lantern trimmed, small, warm and patient, and if the wind brings butterflies to the window, count them without needing a number. When you're ready, we'll begin. Moon thread over the astral sea, Act 1. Night laid itself neatly over Lunar Isle, and the astral altar hummed a half-step sharp, like a harp string that needed the gentlest turn. I stood at the cliff path with my satchel and a sensible lantern, while the sea breathed in long, even lines below. Keep your seal of passage where the clan can see it, the Oneromancer said beneath her breath. Her robe caught the starlight as if it had been woven from it. No Saradomin blues, no Zamorak reds within the circle tonight. The Astral dislikes arguments. Understood, I answered. Your altar's song is wrong. I can feel it in my teeth. A memory has anchored where it shouldn't, she said, a moon thread tangled in a mind in Varroc. He is a Zerosian scholar, careful man, fearful of what he knows. He won't share, and his fear is choking the flow. A round-nosed goblin in a leather apron came trotting up the steps, goggles perched on his brow. Old Dak of Dorgish Khan, he chirped. I've brought a little device. Harmless, no explosions probably. A moon frame. If the dream decides to shuffle its doors, this will prefer ours. You once sent me across half the world with a teleport sphere, I said. I should like to keep my bones in the usual number. Ulduck grinned. Then don't drop anything. The door of a crooked little hut creaked behind us, and the hut creaked with it. Baba Yaga's walking house had shuffled over to eavesdrop. The witch peered out, eyes bright as pinheads. I heard fussing. Fussing wakes the ingredients. I've brewed your waking sleep, she said, handing the Oneromancer a silver bowl that smelled faintly of crushed astral rune and herbs. Sip, don't gulp. Mine's brews. From the path to the clan hall came Haig Halen, the Varroc Museum curator, coat buttoned up to the chin against the sea air. Consent signed and witnessed, he said, pressing a parchment into my hands. The scholar sleeps in the west wing, guarded. He asked that you take nothing but the knot that hurts him. We'll take nothing at all, the Oneromancer said, and teach the knot to breathe instead. Inside the Moon Clan Hall, star lamps hung in tidy constellations. The Oneromancer drew a thin circle with powdered rune, and the floor seemed to agree to it. 3 rules, she said, setting the silver bowl on a low stone. Speak plainly in the mindscape. If a guardian bears the host's true name, you outthink it. You don't break it, and time thickens as we descend. If you feel yourselves drifting, touch this. She lifted a carved totem from Dream Mentorites, smooth wood, rune-etched and familiar to anyone who had ever learned bravery the hard way. Names first, she added. I am the Oneromancer. Ulduck, said the goblin, patting his moonframe. It flexes. Mine's like flex. Baba Yaga, said the witch, and this house is listening. I gave mine, the small everyday one, the kind you can carry without posture. The Oneromancer nodded. Let the breath fall lower than worry, she murmured. When the lamps dim, step where the floor has the courtesy to appear. We drank. The hall's lamps sighed and leaned. The rune dust brightened along the circle's edge. Starlight drew itself into a thread, and the world settled into a patient hush. Varrock rose around us, not the cobbles and chatter of day, but the museum as a mind remembers it. Glass cases and shadow, banners stirring without wind, the riverlum rumouring iron somewhere beyond the stone. In a narrow bed under the west stair the scholar slept, brow creased, fingers resting on the consent we had folded. Astral thread, fine as spider silk, ran from his wrist to the sign of the moon. "Your voice will carry," the Oneiromancer said softly. "Speak kindly." "Scholar," I said, and the museum leaned closer. "We borrow your threshold to straighten its rug. Keep your secrets. Give us only the knot, and we'll loosen it." The floor rippled like paper turned beneath a careful hand. Wood became moonlight. The idea of floor appeared and held. Exhibits blinked and shifted when we didn't look. Drainer's map where a Karamjan idol had just been, a case that read Staff of Armadile, Replica, and then coyly, Possibility. Above us constellations bloomed, none from any chart I owned. A voice glided out from between the cases. "Welcome, patrons, to the curated piece of knowledge," it said, in the polite tone of a docent who never raises it. "Please refrain from touching the exhibits." They have already consented to be correct. "You're an echo," I said, smiling. "House voice in a good suit. Tell me, why does the astral altar sing wrong when your labels are so certain?" "Because certainty is restful," the docent replied. "The altar hums to soothe you." Oldak crouched, tapping the moonframe so its rings purred. "The plaques are moving when we look away," he murmured. The date on the second age relief just winked. "Names," I said, laying a hand on the totem. "I am exactly who I said I was at the door. We ask passage to the stacks beneath this hall." "There are no stacks beneath this hall," the docent insisted, smile fixed. Baba Yaga sniffed the floorboards. "Then why does it smell of papyrus and dust?" "Because the floor is very proud of being a floor," I chuckled. "And I'm very proud of being old. Neither makes us perfect. Show us the skylight you keep pretending isn't there." Silence gathered like breath before a word. A pane of star glass brightened overhead, and a narrow hatch unlatched itself with the shyness of an idea offered late. A ladder unfolded from constellations. "There we are," Oldak said, pleased. "A hatch to belief beneath the facts." "Hold the hall steady," the Oneiromancer told the echo. "We'll return it as we found it, only truer." "Please do not wake the guardians by shouting," the docent whispered, and for the first time sounded relieved. We climbed into starlight that tasted faintly of chalk. Corridors unspooled, pale stone too tidy for comfort, the kind of tidiness that files its own size. The geometry felt Zarosian, exactness that expects the world to agree. "A belief archive," I said. He's shelved his fear as law. "Then we'll ask the law to remember it was once a story," the Oneiromancer answered, setting the totem in my palm. "Look for the moon thread where corridors refuse to agree with one another." We waited, listening. Beneath the neat silence was another sound, like the astral trying not to cough. "There," Oldak said, pointing to a seam in the air drawn taut as a bowstring. The walls around it shivered to keep their dignity. The totem warmed. Somewhere far away the scholar's sleeping breath caught. "We see you're not," I murmured. "We won't take it, only teach it how to breathe with the world." Oldak flicked a switch on the moonframe, and the rings answered with a satisfied purr. "Flux in the corners," he said. "The dream disagrees with itself." "That's our door down." The Oneiromancer guided my hand to the seam. "By names spoken without armour," she said. "By memory kept without pride. Open." The seam hummed. Constellations turned like keys in an old lock. A cool stare unfolded. Polite, inevitable. "We won't drown your knowledge. Baba Yaga breathed toward the hush. We'll teach it to float. That's the way, I said. From the museum that curates itself to the archive that believes too much and beyond, where the sea holds stillness like an accusation. Ready? Asked the Oneiromancer. We answered together. Ready? We began the descent, lantern held at a sensible angle, moonframe ticking softly in Oldak's hands, the dream mentor totem warm and steady. Above us, the Varrock Hall rearranged itself into patience. Below, the Astral waited, breath shallow but waiting. Moon thread over the Astral Sea. Act 2. The stair cooled our palms as we descended, and the starlight behind us folded itself up like a well-mannered map. The air grew exact. Corridors met at right angles that felt proud of being right, and the walls wore pale Zerosian stone, polished to the kind of silence that expects you to agree without discussion. Belief, the Oneiromancer murmured, tracing a rune in the air that refused to smudge. He's filed his fear as law. Oldak set his moonframe on a plinth and coaxed the rings until they purred. Exit stitched. If the hall changes the locks, this prefers our side. Baba Yaga's house was not with us, but a whiff of her herbs seemed to drift whenever the light grew thin. Mine's bruise, she had said. Don't poke the purple bits. I kept that in mind as we walked. The first sentries appeared without footsteps, empty suits of ancient Zerosian armour that held themselves together by opinion alone. A visor turned, and where eyes ought to have been there was geometry, neat and cold. I lifted the Dream Mentor totem, letting its warmth sit between my fingers. We're visitors, not thieves, I said. We've come to loosen a knot. The helmets considered this. One spear lowered a thoughtful inch. Another tilted at the moonframe, curious, then returned to attention. The corridor allowed us through, but only just. We found the catalogue chamber by the absence of dust. Shelves reached up like ambitions. Tablets glimmered with tidy script. When we read one, the tablet behind it rewrote itself in smaller letters, as if retreating from its own certainty. On the central slab lay the first honest clue, a line about the astral and breath, and the danger of letting strangers draw from the same cup. He is not hoarding for greed, the Oneiromancer said. He is hoarding for fear of war. And fear is the tightest knot, I answered. A hush fell that wasn't ours. The walls drew closer by the width of a thought. From the ceiling, something unfurled like a banner and rearranged itself into a figure too smooth to be a person. It smiled without mouth or teeth. Its voice arrived pre-ordered. Peace, it said. Peace requires custody. Peace, I said, requires breath. The figure's edges sharpened. Breath invites appetite. Baba Yaga would have called this a clever cupboard with nothing useful in it. I set the totem against the slab. Names, I said softly to the room and to myself. I gave mine, the small one, the true one. The totem glowed in a homely way like a kettle deciding to boil. The corridor eased its shoulders. The figure's edges dulled a fraction, annoyed that honesty had been spoken aloud. We pressed on, down a passage that refused to echo. Here the floor had opinions about footsteps. The Oneiromancer touched the wall and drew her hand back, frowning. It's looping time, she said. Not fast. Enough to make doubt look sensible. Then we will be sensibler, Oldak said, pocketing a grin. He tapped the moonframe. The rings adjusted. There's a seam ahead where perfect corners forgot to agree. That was when the butterflies came. At first I thought Ash had taken a liking to flight, but the drift had purpose and the edges were exact. Black butterflies, glossy as wet ink, drifted round the bend and settled along the safe line of the floor, on the suggestion of a railing, on the polite curve of a step that almost wasn't there, on the back of my glove. Their wings did not reflect our light. They drank it and returned it softer. "Guides," I said. "Witnesses," the oneiromancer breathed. "They land where kindness will hold." We followed their procession into a circular room where the air tasted faintly of chalk and salt. A skylight that wasn't a skylight looked down on a stillness pretending to be sky. Beneath it lay the second seam, tighter than the first, humming like a thread pulled hard through cloth. "Here," Oldak said, voice narrowing. "This is the tug." He's tied the moon thread to an idea and told it not to move. We worked in silence. The oneiromancer traced a permissive rune. Oldak softened angles that had never considered soft. I held the totem and named small, sturdy things until the loop in time stopped insisting it knew better. The seam sighed. The room exhaled. The butterflies rose and turned, a slow spiral that felt like approval. The stairs below that seam were not stone, they were shoreline. We stepped down onto pale sand where the Astral washed up in slow, careful waves. The water had the colour of moonlight poured through glass, and the tide moved as if embarrassed to be seen. Far out, the horizon wore a faint silver seam, tugging the sea toward stillness. "This is the wound," the oneiromancer said, "where the knot taught the world not to breathe." A hush lifted from the dunes, and 3 shapes joined us. Dream figures, familiar in the way a lesson is familiar even when it changes its hat. One towered in the distance, always an arm beyond reach. One was the size of my doubt. One had 1,000 patient steps. In another life, I had met their cousins in a Fremenic dream, and they had taught me that some tests prefer an offering to an argument. The unreachable one raised a hand, palm outward. The small one tilted its head, waiting to be named. The patient one put its foot forward and did not tire of doing so. "We cannot kill them," I said. "They wear his true name somewhere under their coats." The oneiromancer nodded. "Offer then." Oldak went first, setting the moon frame at the water's edge. "I built this to be clever," he said. "I accept that it should never be perfect." He turned a ring 1 hair off alignment and left it there. The unreachable figure stepped nearer by half a pace. I placed the totem on the sand. "I am myself without armour," I said, and felt the silly relief of telling the truth that needed telling. The small figure unknotted by the width of a smile. The oneiromancer drew a breath and let it out. "I will share the method we make here," she said to the sea and to the knot sky above it. "No clan alone will keep it." The patient figure's foot paused, then planted itself as if satisfied with the ground. Across the water the silver seam brightened, almost cross. The tide hesitated. Somewhere far away the astral altar in its cave tried to sing in tune and could not quite find the note. "Kindness is not permission," a voice said from nowhere in particular. It was the catalogue chamber's voice, tidier and colder. "Custody keeps the world intact." "Custody keeps the world small," I answered. The horizon narrowed to a thread. The sea stilled further, every ripple ironing itself flat as a plaque. Beneath my feet the sand grew glass slick with certainty. "He's turning fear into law," the oneiromancer said, fighting a frown. "If it hardens, teleports will begin to hold their breath. People will be left between." Baba Yaga's herbs were nowhere to be seen, and yet the memory of them lingered. Mind's bruise. Do not poke the purple bits. I knelt and touched 2 fingers to the sea. "We won't take your thread," I said. "Not to the knot, not to the scholar, but to the place where both met. We'll teach it to breathe through its own worry." The butterflies descended like night with good manners and settled along the line of the horizon, wing to wing, a living chain. Their weight was nothing, but their choosing was everything. The silver seam trembled as if surprised to have been touched by such small insistence. Then the twist showed itself. Behind the seam, casting no shadow, a shape moved, only the idea of a staff passing like a memory at noon. The stillness flinched. The catalogue voice sharpened into something close to anger. "A mortal broke a god," it said. "The ledger was never balanced. Breath brings knives. Quiet forbids them." "Quiet forbids breath," I said gently, "and breath keeps the knives from being the only song in town." The sea froze. Not ice, decision. The horizon drew itself into a straight line and locked. The exit behind us sealed with the disappointed sound of a door that had wanted to be a window. The butterflies rose and would not land on the sea. There was no kindness there to answer. "Low tide," Oldak said, grim and practical. "And low point." Time thickened around our ankles the way mud does when it tries to recall you to ground. The moon frame ticked, struggling. The totem cooled. "Choices," the Aneromancer said, and her voice was a steady bench. "We can tear the knot, close the rift, and starve the astral roots for a season. Or we can retune it, risk the claws of certainty, and teach it to breathe. The easy kindness hurts many. The hard kindness hurts now." I thought of Varroc's little shortcuts, of friends blinking from bank to home with the comfort of a sigh. I thought of the scholar asleep beneath his own fear. I thought of Baba Yaga's mutter, mind's bruise. "Retune," I said. "Retune," Oldak agreed, setting his hands to the moon frame, turning the clever rings into a pattern that refused to close. The Oneromancer drew 3 small circles on the glass slick sand, each just big enough to stand in. 3 anchors, she said. Will, change, price. I stepped into the first and spoke my ordinary name, the one my mother used when she meant stand up straight. Oldak stepped into the second and altered the moon frame by a shy degree, designing it to prefer almost. The Oneromancer stepped into the third and closed her eyes. "A toll paid," she whispered. "A fear surrendered." She did not tell us which one. The horizon listened. The silver line trembled, grew thread-like, then ribboned. The sea remembered how to shiver. A single butterfly dared the water and set its feet upon the first ripple. Another followed, a third. Soon a dark necklace lay across the tide, weighing it just enough to teach it the curve of mercy. The catalogue voice thinned until it sounded like someone reading a rule after deciding not to enforce it. "Breath invites appetite," it tried again, without conviction. "Then learn to tell appetite from craft," I said, and eased a breath out through my teeth. The exit above us loosened its sulk and unlatched the width of a palm. The totem warmed. Oldak's moon frame ticked in a friendlier key. The Oneromancer looked up at the knot sky and gave a small, private nod. "We've not finished," she said. "We've only convinced the room to listen." Across the water, far beyond the butterflies, something shifted. Not a god, not a weapon. The shape of a careful man's love of order, embarrassed perhaps to have become a cage. The tide lifted. The seam softened. "Back through the archive," I said, "and up by the museum skylight. We'll carry the tune with us, teach it to the rest." The butterflies lifted off the ribbon and gathered above our heads, a soft canopy of moving night. They drifted ahead toward the stairs, and the sea, freed of their polite weight, kept the curve they'd taught it. We climbed, leaving the shoreline to remember us. The circular room welcomed us, as if we'd always meant to return. The catalogue chamber shelved its tablets without sulking. The Zerosian helmet stood a fraction less stiff than before, as if someone had taught their shoulders to like the notion of being shoulders at all. At the seam to the museum hall, the Oneromancer rested her palm against the star pane and listened for a long moment. "He's waking the harder part," she said, "the piece that stained the river. We'll need to carry this calm into daylight." "Then let's be quick," Oldak said, scooping up his moonframe. I took the totem and tucked it into my coat. The butterflies drifted round our heads, then slip through the hatch in a gentle procession, one by one, like commas deciding where the next sentence wants to breathe. We followed them up, toward the cases and the banners and the river Lum beyond the stone. The hall arranged itself into patience as we passed. Somewhere far away, the astral altar found its note for a heartbeat, held it and let it go, as if rehearsing for the moment it could sing it properly. We would ask the river to listen next, and the city, and, if we did our work well, the scholar himself. Moon thread over the astral sea. Act 3. Varrock received us with the pale light before true morning, when the streets are mostly memory and the river Lum pretends to be the only thing awake. The museum's banners hung still. Somewhere a baker let trays breathe. In the west wing, the scholar lay as we left him, brow creased, hand upon his signed consent, the astral thread whispering its silver between pulse and sigil. "He's close to the surface," the Oneiromancer said, listening with her fingertips to the air above his chest. "Bring what we learned below, or it will slip back to habit." Oldak set the moonframe upon a side table and tuned the rings until they purred in that almost perfect way the mind forgives. "The archive yielded," he said, "but the river still wears the stain." "Then we asked the water," I said. We stepped out through the museum's east doors. The Lum should have been all silver at that hour. Instead, a faint red braided under the light, like a thought the city would rather not finish. A trio of blue-robed curates watched from the parapet with the careful faces of men who wish to be slow before they are certain. One of them had the decency to look relieved when he saw the Oneiromancer. Another looked merely interested, which in a priest is often a good sign. "No sermons," said the Oneiromancer mildly. "Just the work." "Just the work," the curate echoed and stood aside. Under the parapet, tucked where the river's lip kisses stone, lay a small disc, the disciplined shadow we had suspected, its lines so tidy they made the water carry themselves. I lifted it out with 2 fingers. It sat in my palm like a rule that had convinced itself it was mercy. "Not ours," the curate said, and the honesty in his voice made it kinder. "It only wanted you blamed for it." "Remained as handwriting," I answered, "a memory that declined to end, disguised as law." The butterflies arrived without fuss, as if a page had turned in a book and the punctuation had flown out. They came from the elm's dim leaves and the undersides of the bridge, gloss-black wings that drank the dawn and returned it softer. They settled along the parapet and the safe line of the coping stones, then upon the disc itself, wing to wing, a living cuff around a sleeping wrist. The Oneiromancer nodded once. Same anchors as below, small circles, steady hands. We'd knelt on the flags where the stone remembers countless shoes. The work asked for quiet, not secrecy. "Will," I said, and spoke my ordinary name, the one that fits in a pocket with a penknife and a list. Oldak breathed out a laugh he didn't know he was holding. "Change," he said, and moved his clever rings one breath off perfect. The moonframe answered with the contented sound of a thing allowed to be human. "Price," said the curate, surprising himself. He looked at the water and not at us. "I give up the fear of being wrong where people can see it. The river is old. It approves of gifts that cost exactly enough." The current lifted and set itself down again, a nod from something that does not need to nod. The red unbraided. Silver remembered it was silver. The butterflies drank the last of the geometry from the disc and then rose in a loose ribbon, crossing the Lum with the air of messengers pleased to be between errands. 1 or 2 hovered over the curate's sleeve and then went on, business concluded without judgment. "We will tell the city it wasn't you," he said, finding his smile not quite ready and not minding. "Nor them. Nor anyone with a flag. It was a memory pretending to be a law. A common conspiracy," I said, and slipped the empty disc into a cloth to be labelled and sun-warmed later in the museum. Let's go finish with the man whose worry hired it. The scholar woke like someone coming up through clear water, slow and complete. His eyes found the Oneiromancer first, and told her, without words, that he remembered permission. They found Oldak next, and did a small, reluctant double-take that made the goblin grin. At last, he saw me, and the relief there was sharp enough to be a blade. "I wanted to keep the world safe," he said. "I forgot it must also be alive." "Order without breath becomes breakage," I answered. "Order with breath becomes craft." He rubbed at his brow as if it were a chalkboard, and he'd only now seen the word he'd written. "The moon thread. If I share it, someone will pull too hard." "If you bury it," the Oneiromancer said gently, "everyone trips over the mound." He swallowed and nodded, a careful man climbing back into his best self. "Then teach me the retuning. Teach me to share without letting it become a trumpet." We returned to the circle at the Oneiromancer's hall by way of a single clean spell, lunar magic now humming in the right key. The astral altar's resonance had settled. You could feel it in your teeth, that tiny relief at last exact. Baba Yaga's hut stood nearby, pretending not to listen with every plank. The witch peered through a window, eyes bright, and waved away our looks as if we had come to borrow sugar. "We make a public rite," the Oneiromancer said, laying the moon frame on a low stone and setting 3 smooth pebbles beside it. "A smoothing for stacked dreams. Not a weapon, a method." Oldak sketched diagrams with a piece of soft slate, lines that refused to close into traps. He passed the slate to the scholar without ceremony. "Copy it wrong by 1 hair on purpose," he advised. "It will behave better." The scholar laughed, startled by the idea. He made the hair's breadth error and left it there like a welcome mat. The rite asked again for will, change, price. We answered again, this time in daylight and with no drama. Black butterflies lifted from the hall's rafters. We had not seen them hiding there, and arranged themselves above the stone in that thoughtful curve they prefer. The astral altar's hum slid the last half-step into comfort and held. From the cliff path, the sea breathed in lines that any heart would be proud to keep. Relica's coast kept its own counsel. In the hut, a kettle found its boil. Haig Halen would have his label soon enough for the emptied disc. I planned the words and felt no need to make them clever. Residual focus remembered and retired. Do not mistake quiet for peace. Do not mistake peace for stillness. Keep the doors kindly ajar, the Oneiromancer said to the scholar, meaning both hall and mind. "I will," he answered, meaning both. Oldak tapped the moon frame until it sang a note a child could follow. "Dorjesh Khan will want a copy," he said, scandalized by how pleased he was. "And not to keep it, only to use it when a tunnel echoes wrong." "Menephos as well," the curate said. He had followed us without fuss and seemed unbothered to be standing on Lunar Isle at all. "We have our own nightmares. We'd like to put them to bed properly." The Oneiromancer placed a small rune mark upon the scholar's wrist. No brand, only a reminder that he could call for help without giving anything away. "You're not a vault," she said. "You're a steward." "And stewards breathe," I added, even when the ledger whispers otherwise. Dusk found us on the ridge above the altar, where the air tastes of salt and old spells. The butterflies formed a slow ribbon along the wind's lazy edge and drifted out over the sea. They might have been punctuation setting off a sentence the world had just managed to say without stammering. "Retuned," Oldak said, satisfied in his bones. "A good word," I said. "Less arrogant than fixed. Kinder than cured." The Oneiromancer smiled at nothing in particular, which on Lunar Isle is a way of thanking the island. "We won't stop all the knots," she said, "but we've taught this one to breathe. And we've left the instructions where anyone decent can find them. Back in Varrock, the river wore silver honestly. At the temple by the bridge, a modest notice read simply, 'Path steady. Passage safe, no signatures, no crests. In the museum, the emptied disc sat on a patch of afternoon sun and learned how to be harmless. When the lights went down, the cases stayed where they were put, as if the dream had agreed to trust the waking world with its arrangement. That evening, I left the stack's door neither open nor latched, kindly ajar, which is how good rooms breathe. On my sill, a single black butterfly rested long enough to be counted, then lifted, and went to attend some other hinge. The Astral sounded true. The city kept an easy pace. The world, which is large and untidy and dear, decided to continue.